Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Attic Static podcast. Today we have special guest here joining us, Brian Collis. Brian is an architect and he has his own business. Brian, you want to share a little bit about your business that you started?
Sure. So my business is probably not going to be, it's probably very different from any other sort of like business, the guy that you might talk, other guests you might not hear talk about. So I'm an architect. So I've been licensed since 96. I lived in Arizona at the time. I got my master's degree out at Arizona State. Moved back to New Jersey in 2004. Was licensed in 2006. Was still working for a firm at that point. And then I went through, so the job I got when I moved back to New Jersey, I was working in Seagirt, and it was another guy who I went to Clemson for my undergrad. So I found this guy's website while I was working in North Carolina, who was obviously the guy was up here, Clemson guy. So I just bookmarked his site and then hated my job in North Carolina. So 2004, everything up here was booming. I live in at the Jersey Shore. Everything was booming. My parents bought a house and said, "Hey, every architect we talk to is like busy. We can't find anybody that'll do it small. If you ever wanted to come home, everybody's busy. Now's a good time." So I sent my resume to this guy, and it turned out that my resume crossed his desk the same day. One of his draftsmen basically gave 2 weeks notice they was going back to Clemson for grad school. So it was like serendipity. So I got up here. I would have gladly worked for that guy till the day I died. I mean, the greatest job I've ever had. Lasted 4 years. It kind of, the economy tanked in 2008. Basically, he cut down to, skeleton crew. So I always said my job, you guys are talking about retirement a lot. My goal was always to sort of semi-retire to the Jersey Shore, design beach houses. And I got here like 40 years ahead of schedule. And then the job lasted 4 years. I'm like, all right, well, now I'm here. Now what do I do? So I worked with a couple other jobs over a couple of years. And I kept on thinking about going out on my own. And I kept on basically chickening out.
As we all do, yeah.
It's like, maybe not. Maybe having somebody else pay my salary, deal with healthcare, all that other stuff. Maybe that's a good idea. So I was actually working for another guy in Brielle. And I'd worked there for about a year. I come in one Monday morning. He's like, you know what? I'm paying you as a registered architect. I'm basically using you as a draftsman. Doesn't make financial sense for me. You're gone.
Oh, my.
So I went home, and I was freaking out. And I got home, and when I got home, first thing Monday morning, like literally, I walked in Monday morning at 8 o'clock, and I was like, I left. I had my desk packed and left the door at 10. So I got home at 10:30, and before lunch, I had 3 people call me out of the blue saying, "Hey, are you doing like side work or stuff? Because I have a project I need help on."
I'm still shocked about the 30-minute commute thing. Like that doesn't compute for me.
Well, it was actually closer to 15 minutes. I kind of took I actually drove down to the beach and sat and stared at the water for a while, trying to gather myself.
Think about jumping in.
Briefly.
I'm digging the serendipity though. Keep going.
Yeah. So anyway, literally I get home and before lunch, I'm like too busy to even claim unemployment. Bizarre, right? And so I often say that I've been on the fence for so long, I finally felt like God's boot in my ass saying, "All right, get off. You're on your own now." And so my wife gets home at 5 and I'm like, "Okay, so I got fired, but it's okay because I'm already too busy." She's like, "Wait, what?" It's like, "Don't worry, I'm already busy." And like literally, I never even claimed a day of unemployment because before lunch I was like booked.
It's great.
So so at Clemson, I was one of the only in my graduating class. I was one of the only Bachelor of Arts of Architecture. Everybody else was a Bachelor of Science.
What's the difference?
Technically, the difference is I had to take 4 semesters of a language, and I got basically more freedom with what I did with my electives.
What did you miss on the technical side, if anything?
There was like one extra semester of like a science, I think. There was, again, it was basically a difference in the electives. It was basically, and then the language was the basic difference.
But why would you want to be able? Why the choice?
That's a good question. I don't know why they offered both. I don't know what the actual difference. I guess it was just sort of, I think a lot of schools tried to have sort of, try to give it so there's a broad range of possibilities within the major, so where you go.
And there's no difference with licensure down the road?
No.
With the BA or BS?
No, because the 4-year degree, you still need to wind up getting at least a 1-year graduate degree after that anyway, before you get licensed. So basically some schools have a 5-year Master of Architecture program. I chose to do the 4-year bachelor's and then a 2-year master's program.
Okay.
So the Master of Architecture is not technically a master's degree. It's what they call it. It's a 5-year degree. Basically, it's your minimum professional degree. And so I went the 4 and 2 actually because I wanted to go to 2 different schools. I wanted a variety of experiences.
He wanted to party.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, he was an animal back in the day. I can sense it.
And he thought that the Bachelor of Science was BS anyway, right?
Exactly. So
word
for me,
bachelor.
I've always come like, it's funny because my wife she's very much sort of all about like numbers, and she was a bachelor. I met her actually in architecture school at Clemson, so she was a Bachelor of Science degree, and
Oops.
it's kind of funny, but yeah, so I've always come at it like numbers like make my head hurt. I'm not like a numbers guy at all. I've always taken it more from the art side. I've always taken it as more of a design job as opposed to like it's not really engineering to me. It's much more an art.
So, question. So,
Sure.
but you're still determining, hey, that 2x6 really needs to be a 2x8.
Oh, absolutely.
You're still doing the.
Absolutely. And I'm trying to think of why I even was going down that road to begin with. But yeah, so like the money part of it and all that stuff was like never like in my head when I started my own business. It was literally like, okay, I'm designing houses now for myself. So it was very interesting the way I started my business.
And then since you started, did you feel that you had to put a lot of effort into marketing or to keep it going, or did things just flow by word of mouth or other
He had
builders?
to pay his phone bill to keep it ringing, right?
Seriously.
How did you keep it going?
Well, again, the first job I had was really sort of like critical for the fact that any success that I'm having now, because that first year, it was a great, it was a great environment to work in. The guy was really laid back. He was a surfer back in the day. He was very, we'd always go out for like, on Friday, he'd just like take us out to lunch. It was like, he was very, very great. He was the greatest boss I've ever had. But in working with him, I got to have, personal relationships with a lot of the builders in the area. And what I love about my old boss is like, he's like my role model, because he's to the point now where he can basically say no to anything that's not a new house on a clean lot, Manasquan, Seagirt, Spring Lake.
Wow.
And he basically can say no to anything that's not that.
Really?
Because that's his niche. That's what he does. He farms out the structure. He doesn't even want to deal with that anymore. So he's my role model. I want to get to that point.
And that's, I'm going to guess that it's much easier when you're working with a clean slate than when you're looking at retrofitting. And yeah, okay.
Yeah. But the greatest thing about it is because I left on good terms. So basically anytime people would call him and he's like, you know what, you're got this little addition, in Howell. It's not really my gig. Call Brian. He used to work with me. You basically get the same experience. And so he's been great.
Wow.
So he's always sort of like been, giving me stuff that,
right.
it's too small for his office to do. And actually that's the first house I actually did as designer of record for myself was when I was still working with him. And it was a project that he didn't want to do. And he's like, Brian, if you want to do this on your own, and he would let me, he let me come in on after hours. I used the same computer I used at work, but he let me come in after hours. So he was great with that. And that really was part of foundationally to sort of what I've been able to do since. And that first house probably is still the favorite thing I've actually done as designer of record. I'm still trying to recreate the magic that happened in that one. So,
What kind of gift baskets do you send Chris over to Holland?
it's funny, I wouldn't even ever send him one. I talk to him a lot still because we both went to Clemson, so we still talk about football and everything else. But it was so funny because one of the greatest things about working there was he got so many gift baskets every year from all the other past clients and builders and everything else. Like literally we would take one day, usually the last day we'd work in December, we'd open up all the gift baskets and we'd just go around the table and everybody would just pick stuff. And there was literally more than we could even take. There was stuff that would sit there until June of the next year. It's all right, I think we can probably throw that away. It's 6 months old now. It's probably not, that summer sausage probably isn't good anymore. So
Wait. Summer sausage lasts.
That's true. That's probably a bad call.
This is Ray, though.
It's good next summer.
It's good
Right,
every
at that point,
summer.
it's perfectly aged, right?
Rarely
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah.
So
But,
you rarely meet someone in this industry, right? How did COVID affect the architect industry?
Best thing that ever happened to me. So just to follow up your question, I've never actually I've literally done no advertising in 8 years of being in business.
That's great.
It's all been word of mouth through builders I've worked with, everything else. COVID, I was I never took a break. I literally didn't take one day off. When everything else closed, I'm I guess I got to still work.
Yeah, people are all holed up and thinking about their house.
And
I'm going to be spending more time here.
So everything shut
more.
down in March, right? So by the time May rolled around, I was talking with one of the builders I do a lot of work with, and we're just trying to figure out why we've both been sleeping 4 hours a night and still like running around doing everything. What do we do? What's going on? It's like people are stuck in their house during daylight for the first time in their adult lives. And they're looking around going, oh my God, I hate all of this. Why have we left it like this? So literally when people couldn't go anywhere and had to sit and stare at their own walls, all of a sudden they said, well, we're not going anywhere. So that vacation fund, might as well redo the kitchen.
So you found it to be more like just regular rooms or like man caves and stuff like that?
It's funny how it developed because it started off, basically, I think it was all the stuff that people had just been putting off, like all the projects that they've always wanted to do but never got around to. Now, like I said, now they're not going on vacations, they're not going anywhere. Now's the time, I guess, we do this work. And then, like as it got to the end of that, now people are going back to work, but they're working remotely. So now they're doing home offices. Now they're doing, all right, me and my wife are both working from home. We each need our own space. We're about to strangle each other. Give us each our own space. And then there's another bunch of people like left like the big cities, and all these people that had beach houses said, all right, if I'm going to telecommute, I'm just going to sell my apartment in Manhattan and I'll just like live at my beach house and work from there. So then like the second year of the pandemic was all people converting their vacation houses to full-time houses.
Right. And we saw the same thing in the Poconos, right? It all shut down and everybody like moved and went out to their vacation home in the Poconos, started working from there and said, hey, I'm never going back, or I'm only going back part-time. And the construction madness began. You couldn't get a contractor for 6 months, no supplies. Right. Everybody's busy. It was insanity out there. And it sounds the same in the beach.
Yeah. The beach was exactly the same. And I was just baffled. Like I kept on, well, once I got to a point, I was like so backlogged. I got to the point when people would say, all right, we're going to do this project. I'm like, construction prices are stupid right now. Would you want to wait? Like, no, we're just going to go ahead and do it. I'm like, are you sure? Couldn't you wait 6 months? And I was continually baffled that the construction, like, you know, the like windows, like lead times went from like 6 weeks to 12 weeks if you could get them. Nobody could get appliances, and everybody was just going full bore ahead with doing stuff. Like the supply chain issues it stopped the builders from doing stuff. So people would start projects and they would take longer, and then they would complain about that. But no one, it seemed like no one was just saying, okay, let's just wait and see what happens. Everybody's just go. So I don't know whether it's like a fatalistic, who knows? We may all not be here next year. We might as well make the house what we like for the last year that, you know, the world is existing. So, so I've just been continually baffled. And I got to a point about, I don't know, 2 months ago where people are saying, are you still busy? I'm like, oh, I'm still busy. It's not quite as bad as it was.
You're sleeping 5 hours a night.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you have your sole proprietorship, or do you have employees?
I'm a sole proprietor. So
you still don't have to deal with the payroll and health insurance.
So I will say midway through last year, my wife, who hated her job, she worked for a civil engineer. She quit her job and has been helping me out. She's a draftsperson anyway. So, well, yeah. So she's
working together.
But it's been fantastic actually, because her experience from the civil side, she does all like the site study and all the stuff that I normally hate to do anyway. And then I get to, the last 10% of every project is always the absolute worst. It's all like the T crossing and I dotting that just like, as my free spirit artist self, it's soul crushing. And she's like all about that stuff. So
how long has she been working with you now?
For about 1.5 years.
Would you say it's made your relationship better, the same, or worse?
I think it's been better.
So, Brian, that brings up an interesting point with your wife working with you. I understand that you're also a writer, and you actually wrote a column called Marriage Moment for 11 years.
That is true.
So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so that's interesting. I've always liked to write. So like, my going back to high school, like my English score, my SATs was higher than my math score. Again, that probably also led to me going, BA in architecture instead of the Bachelor of Science route. So there was a time when I was, shortly after, maybe 2 or 3 years after we'd moved up here, I just was in a bad headspace of my own. I don't know, there was nothing wrong with our relationship, but all of a sudden, I was making problems where there weren't. And so I found a therapist I went to. I went to her literally 3 times. And after the first time, she was like, okay, you're intimidating me a little bit. You're using words that I don't even understand yet. So let's and then the second time she's like, all right, I see where you're coming from. And the third time she's like, all right, you've read more books on marriage than most counselors I know. When do you start sharing? When do you start sharing all the stuff you know? I'm like, what do you mean? She's like, you have all this knowledge, but you're not, what are you doing with it? And so literally, I said, oh, maybe I should start writing some stuff down. And So through the church that me and Ed attended, I started writing an article in our monthly newsletter, basically, you know, on marriage and from a Christian perspective. But I think a lot of the, you know, if you literally just like, you know, blacked out the verses that I highlighted, the advice is all basically would have still been the same. So that was actually really, it was really fulfilling. And actually, it was actually, I think the most help it was for me was to take take the focus off myself. And once I started writing about things, then people would ask me questions and give me ideas for articles and stuff. And all of a sudden I realized that, you know, I really didn't have the problems that I thought I had.
What was the subject you're writing? Was this like a day in the life, a day in your life, or was it how to?
It was more of a how-to, more of a things, just sort of different ways to put certain things in perspective. I mean, a lot of it was about, after 11 years, I kind of realized that I probably could have written the entire thing in like 3 sentences. And it really was about talk honestly and openly. That's kind of really all of it.
That's one sentence.
Right. I probably, you know, I'm a writer, so I probably could have embellished it a little bit. But, you know, but really, like, if the communication is really the closest thing to a silver bullet into the whole, you know, relationship problem.
All right.
And actually, it was interesting. I got to a certain point where I started to feel like I was repeating myself because there's only so many, you know. First of all, you know, I started pulling, you know, marriage messages out of verses that you would have never thought would be marriage messages, and I would sort of like find, and like, you know, so I run sometimes too, right? So I did there's 4 different places in the New Testament where the Apostle Paul talks about, he uses running a race as a metaphor, and so I did like a whole 4-part thing on running, on race running and how it applies and blah blah blah. But I started feeling like I was repeating myself, and another guy we went to church with was basically like, that's okay, because, you know, you're writing stuff. I'm like 8 years into my
People
writing
haven't read the first ones anyway.
He's like, yeah, you're reaching new people, and he's like, and sometimes the people that read it last time, they're gonna see this, and it'll click this time.
That's right.
So
So it says here, poet and writer. So what about the poet part?
When he writes his stuff, it rhymes.
that's funny. A lot of my poetry doesn't rhyme. Actually, it's all more meter, but yeah, so like, again, I've always been more of a creature of language than of numbers. So like I've always sort of written, and so for a while I had a Facebook group called Facebook groups. I mean, it exists anymore, but it was called. I'm trying. It was Poet something. I have to go back and look at it now. I haven't looked at it in a while, but there was like 6 or 7 of us that were in that group all the time, and basically we would take each month, we would each come up with a rule. And then the last person would have a subject, and then we would like spend that month trying to write a poem using those rules with that subject.
Okay.
And it was a great design exercise. One of those things I would also apply to a lot of architectural problems and everything else. Like all of a sudden, if you have like rules that you're trying to work within, it changes things, right? Like a blank piece of paper sometimes is the scariest thing. And all of a sudden, so if you have rules, now it's like, oh, now it makes you think about word choices and about how you put things together. And I think a lot of times, I often tell, even, you know, with my architectural education, I often say that if I was to do anything else, I wouldn't trade my architecture schooling for anything. Because essentially it was 6 years of creative problem solving, public speaking, and, you know, you can use those things to apply to anything.
What led you to architecture in the first place, and how old were you when you realized that's what you wanted to do?
Is it from George Costanza?
No. Yeah, so I've known I wanted to be an architect since I was in 4th grade.
Any specific event, lead you to it?
Sort of, yeah. So like I'd always been like from way back in the day when I was little, like Lincoln Logs and Legos were always my favorite thing, right? So I mean, I erector sets. I would like love to build stuff. And so in 4th grade, I was in this program for advanced students, I guess. It was like an independent study project. It was basically like, a thesis project for 4th graders. So it's like you come up with an idea and then you do some research and then you put together a project. And I was doing some sort of like crazy like engineering thing, like something about like desalinization of salt water, blah, blah, blah. And I kept on like ignoring the technical research. And I'm like, when can we get to the build the model? And finally my Mr. Schwartz, I'll never forget him. Finally, he's like, how about we just do architecture? All you want to do is build the building anyway, don't you? I'm like, that's it. You're right. And so I changed my whole, like midway through, I changed my entire focus. I went and interviewed a couple of architects and I built like some little sort of, cardboard model and it was great. So, and ever since then, I'm like, nope, that's what I'm doing. And
So I think a lot of people probably have a weird distinction, like for building a house or building a building, you need an architect, but you also need engineers. Where's the split, right? Like what's the difference between them?
Right. So for residential stuff, you can almost always get away without an engineer. As far as like structural stuff, because basically there's programs out there now that you can size, just about anybody can size a wood beam now. If it's holding, regular living space load, it's spanning X feet, there's tables you can go to. It says you need this size member. There's still the occasional thing where somebody wants to do something really weird. I did have to, somebody was they're opening up their, open floor plans are all the thing, right? So somebody wanted to open up their floor plan, didn't want a column anywhere, and it was like 27 feet across his house. I'm like, we're not doing that in wood. So that was one. I brought in a structural engineer, and we sized the steel beam to go across that. So that's just like for the structural side, though. There's always like civil engineers are almost always still necessary, because every town now you want, water runoff. If you're disturbing land, you want to see like where's that water going after it goes out. If you're grading the site, so civil engineers are almost always still needed. But for like residential stuff, the scale stuff that I do, I can do like 95% of the structural stuff myself.
Got it.
And you do no non-residential? Don't do light
I
commercial?
do the occasional light commercial stuff. Like if it's a tenant fit out, if it's something that's not good. The problem becomes like the codes are such that, as a one-man show, if I have like 7 projects on the boards, and there's just one of this project that I have to like, now I got to sort of go in, I got to do the ADA's research. It's all the stuff that's not in my normal wheelhouse. It just takes so much time. I mean, I could still do it. If I had like no work on the boards, I would take those projects because then I had the time to expend on them. But profit-wise, it's just sometimes it's hard to make money for me because that's just not what I'm set up to do.
So tell us about the business side of things. You're sole proprietor. You do architect work for individuals, right? So
Yep.
How does it work as a job or as a business? How do you run it? How do you compare it to your wife was working with a normal salary, right, for a regular job? So tell us how it feels to you to be independent. It's
pretty awesome. I can say that now. It's always been awesome in the sense that I love being able to make my own schedule. And so for the longest time, when my wife was still working, we had our 2 kids. And so like when they were still in school, if I needed to take time off in the middle of the day to go take one kid somewhere, I could do that. And then I could make up that work at night. I could, work on a Saturday morning to make up that. So the flexibility of my own schedule has been really, really important. And the last job I had, like the guy who let me go that one day is like, the problem was like the parts of the job that I love are actually talking to people and sort of finding out what they need and how to, and figuring out the design solutions. And my last boss sort of like hoarded those, those interactions. Like my first boss, Chris, who I worked with, he was great. He would always have us in the project meetings, and then he would just like, all right, this is kind of what they want. He would like do like a scribble on a piece of paper and say, here, just run with this, figure that out. Whereas my last boss was like he like kept the design stuff really to himself. And so it's like his working there was so little fun because like I didn't feel like I was doing anything that I got into this job to do.
When he turned around and said, I'm just using you as a draftsman anyway, right? That's self-imposed, right? He kind of did that on his own, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right? And exactly. So I'm not sure why he hired me to begin with, right. If that's all he wanted out of me. But again, it was just the way he ran his business. And again, I can see a lot of myself in him. That's one of the reasons why I don't have any employees, because I do love that part of the business. You know what I mean?
So why don't you have an employee doing the stuff you don't like?
Well, I kind of don't need that now because like my wife kind of sort of bridged that gap for right now. So
fair enough.
And
how do you handle health insurance, since you're paying for it yourself?
Yeah. So we went through the marketplace, and found a plan, and obviously we're all, we're knock on wood, we're fairly healthy. So we just bought the minimum possible plan, which is still, awful trying to pay for. And it just is what it is, right? So
you're talking about the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, right?
Yeah. So New Jersey has, eHealth New Jersey, whatever it is. That's sort of like the marketplace where you go through them and they'll sort of walk you through filling out the forms, and then they say, okay, based on all these things, here's your plans, and you just pick one, and then
silver, bronze, whatever, right?
Okay. And insurance is a big thing in your industry, no?
Yeah. So I do have, the professional, the E&O, so errors and omissions insurance. It's one of those things where for the level of stuff I'm doing, it's probably not 100% necessary, but obviously it's smart. And obviously I realized, once you start paying your own taxes, all of a sudden it's like helpful to have those things. It's helpful to have expenses. Like the first couple of years, I basically had almost no expenses. I mean, I was working out of my house. I was,
You could write off everything.
yeah. And then you learn that real quick. So like actually the first year was brutal. Having that half year where I was just kind of scrambling to fill in the gaps. That first year was such a learning process of like, oh wait, now we owe this much because I had nothing to write off. I was just like, trying to scrimp and save and, I was trying to have no expenses, not realizing that, oh no, you need expenses. Otherwise, April is really, really hideous.
So, Brian, when you're speaking earlier about your writing, you also mentioned about running.
Yes.
Is this kind of small scale, like 5Ks? You do marathons, half marathons? What type of running are you involved in?
I've done one marathon, and I didn't catch the bug. And so I think the best and worst thing that happened to me is I hit both my goals. And it's one of the things I didn't even want to do it. Two of my friends signed up, said, all right, we're doing it. And
Which did you run?
The New Jersey Marathon, the one in starts at Long Branch, yeah. Or it starts at Monmouth Park, and then finishes in Long Branch. And so my friend signed up, and I'm like, I'm not going to do it. And then I was like, I realized that like if I didn't do it, I would have to see their posts that they did it afterwards. And I'm like, all right, well, screw that. I'm not letting them finish without me.
Whatever motivates you, right?
Exactly. Right. And so I signed up, and it was funny because both of them are a lot younger than me, and I beat them both. And like I said, I hit both my goals, and so I felt like I never needed to do another.
What were the
one.
goals?
So I wanted to be under 4 hours, and then I wanted my stretch goals. I wanted my average pace to be under 9 minutes. And I ended at like 3:56 and 8:58, whatever,
Adam, where were you?
3:56:20.
For you, I didn't even know you ran a marathon.
You ran the
Really?
same Philly marathon you ran.
Philly, too.
The same day. Same day.
That was my PR day. That's why you guys were there. I don't remember. We're talking.
That's why we were there.
That was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Wait, you went there for me?
No.
Gary was all gloating in his glory. When I came through, I passed, the last few miles of that out and back to Manayunk. I saw the Ethiopians, Tanzanians, and then there's Gary right on your heels. You were 8th place, weren't you?
Close.
I think you were 8th.
16th.
Well, just take 8th.
That's pretty good, Gary.
Yeah, so
It would
I
not be
felt bad
16th
afterwards
today.
beating both my friends because like my one friend I felt really bad because
I think you should have rubbed it in.
I kind of
You're
did
old.
without knowing it, right? So the first guy I passed twice, and he's not a runner. He ran it because we were all in this mode where we're all like running stuff, but he's like a big bodybuilder dude, so he's like not built for speed. And but he when I signed up, you had to sign up for where your
Pace.
your intended pace, right? So I signed up one corral behind where I thought I actually could wind up. So I figured I wouldn't embarrass myself that way. And he was like really gung ho at the beginning, so he signed up one corral ahead of where he should have. So like I passed him like in mile 2, and then I hit the porta potty, and then he passed me while I was and then I passed him again at mile 6, and he's like, "You jerk, you passed me twice." I'm like, "Oh, sorry, man." And then my other friend, who actually is a runner, like ran in high school, and like we expected all to like get finish like hours behind him. He I think he overtrained a little bit and had like a hellacious leg cramp at mile 19. So he was like limping like the last like 7 miles of the race.
Did you pass him?
I passed him at mile 21.
Nice.
Did you laugh?
It was funny because like at mile once you pass mile 20, right, you're in that different headspace, right? So things are like different past mile 20, right? And so, but we got to the point where we were on the boardwalk in Long Branch, and I'm going, and I knew what shirt he was wearing. He was wearing a Tough Mudder shirt, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to pass Malachi. And so as I went by, I just patted him on the back and just kept going.
Knocked him over. He falls on his face. With his leg
Like I said, I didn't even complete in my mind like that something could be wrong. I just I was like, cool, I'm going to pass Malachi. I was like all like excited. And it was so funny because I had like spent so much time, all the stuff I was reading is like, mile 20, that's where you hit the wall. Like, that's where, it's like my longest training run was 20. So I hit past mile 20. I'm like, every step I've taken is now the longest I've ever ran, which was kind of like cool. And so I was so ready for the 20-mile like wall. I actually had like 2 iPod Nanos. I had my one for the majority of the race. And at mile like 19 and a half at the water station, I switched to the other one, which was like my 12 favorite running songs.
Rocky.
Just to totally like pump myself up. And then I passed Malachi, and I sailed. I was like, I don't even think I touched the ground for like the last 5 miles. I was like, I passed Malachi. This is like the greatest thing ever.
But that's great. You're passing on the motivation because now your friend has something to be motivated about. It's like, oh, I got to get the next race. I got to get me pride.
So he like beats me in every other race we've ever run together. So just last weekend or 2 weekends ago, I ran the Garden State 10 in Somerset, which is actually my favorite race to run. It's really interesting format. So you run a 5K, and then you line up again, and then you run 10 miles.
No, that's only if you want to.
Yeah.
Not standard.
But you get the cool challenge accepted medal if you run both races. So and that race is like it's all about. They have the best medals like ever. So it's like that race is all about the bling. So like every year is a different sort of like jersey theme. Like so, one year their medals were like the state trooper logo, but it said Garden State 10 on it. You know, one year it was the Jersey Devil. One year was like diner themed, and so this year it was actually the medal was the white and red pork roll box.
Nice. You mean Taylor Ham?
Yeah,
Taylor
Taylor
pork roll.
Ham.
Taylor.
Pork roll in
From
Jersey.
North Jersey, like again, I don't know where. Like I'm all about Taylor ham too, and I'll tell you the story that Butcher Taylor actually called it Taylor's processed ham when he invented it, and the FDA rules in 1906 defined what you could call ham, so he had to change it after 1906, after the FDA regulations. So I say if you call it pork roll, you're just bowing down to the man. Screw that. I'm going to call it Taylor ham because that's what Butcher Taylor called it.
So what do you think about having like have like the beer mile? They have like the Taylor Ham mile.
That'd be pretty cool.
Pork roll mile. Pork roll mile.
Yeah,
No,
growing up
you're
in
not
South
bound
Jersey, it
down
was
to the
pork roll. In South Jersey, it was.
Yeah.
Don't listen to the government, man. Don't let them tell you what to say.
They're listening to this.
I gotta say, I'm kind of middle of this state, but pork roll, egg, and cheese just rolls off your tongue too
No,
easily.
Taylor Ham. Taylor Ham egg and cheese is just
ham,
standard.
egg, and cheese.
It's practically one word. You don't even need to put spaces.
Taylor
Ham,
ham,
and cheese.
egg,
It's
and
Taylor ham,
cheese.
yeah.
It's not as cool. Pork
That
roll,
sounds
egg,
like a full
Pork
debatable
roll.
topic for another whole
That's
episode.
a separate episode. Yeah, let's not get-
That's a breakfast. We have to do that early in the morning and have a breakfast episode for that one.
So do you run like one race a year?
No, well, I mean, I was running until the pandemic, I was running like a handful. There's always the NJ Share 5K. I always run with my friends because they have a child that died, and so the NJ Share one is all based on organ donation, that kind of stuff. And so I always run that race with them. I'm the only one I think they told me last year that's run it with them every year they've been a part of it. So like that's always the one I run. And then I try to do, that's usually in June. So I try to do one in the great thing about the GS10 is you're training for 10 miles, so you can't sort of like slack off, and it makes me run through the winter to be ready for it. So otherwise it'd be really easy just to not get out of bed. And then I usually try one. I try to keep one, so one in the fall, one in the summer, and then one in the spring, just to sort of keep some. I find like through the pandemic is like it was the worst trying to like actually stay motivated to do anything. It's like nothing's on the schedule. Why am I bothering?
I never understood that, how so many people during the pandemic gained weight. I'm like, you have all this free time. You have plenty of time. I mean, I was in the best shape I've ever been in because nothing was in the way.
Right.
I had the same, like the people that I run with, which was like once a week. We started running. I think I was running almost every day for several months until my hip started bothering me. I had to cut it back. But it was just like, what else are we gonna do, right? Just every day, just going out and running.
Eat.
Right? I mean, eat.
But
Yeah, but
you eat before.
run first, eat second. Right?
You can eat up all those miles on the
How
road.
could you be confused? It's common. They're stuck in their house. They're eating.
Yeah, you're closer
Pork
to the
roll.
refrigerator,
Yeah.
man. You got the Taylor ham and the pork roll right there.
Now for the runners, do you run morning or night?
Morning.
Always
Morning.
morning, right?
Morning.
Gotta be morning.
I used to only be able to run at night, and then I got older and started running in the mornings because I was never a morning person. And by the time 5 o'clock comes, I can't move my legs. So when they have these evening races, I'm like, oh man, this is time for bed. I can't do this.
Yeah, I noticed just like, when it got to that point, like where I had a kid in middle school and high school and like they were always doing something. It's like, I knew if I didn't run first thing in the morning, by the time you get home, it's like, it's just not
It's nice to be
happening.
done,
There's just, it's just not happening at that point.
You got to get it in.
I've never been a morning person either, but like I forced myself to be a morning person just to get the run out of the way.
All right, I went out. I ran at 6:45 this morning. You,
This morning I slept in.
Gary?
Well,
I like
went to
how
the-
you
I went to the
bypassed
gym
me.
first at 7.
He knows I
and then
retired
ran
from running.
after that, so I did both.
So you did both.
But 7 was the start. At
Johnny, no running. Ed,
I ran last night.
you ran last. Oh, he's a night
There's
runner.
a night
I run
run.
up and down.
Well,
the
it's because the
stairs.
schedule mandated it.
So usually I try to get up at 6 and then I alternate, the gym and runs. So
My calendar says that's what I'm doing, but it's not actually happening. Adam doesn't run.
Yeah, I'm retired, but I might come out of retirement.
You can run errands. You can do a lot of running.
Oh, I do that kind of stuff.
Run the mouth.
Yeah, I run my mouth
through
a
my
lot.
head.
So, Brian, I understand you also have a serious gaming hobby that led to store champ title and paint competition. Want to share a little bit about that?
So
Paint competition.
Oh, he's going to
Yes.
tell you about it.
All right.
yes, I am. Well, it's kind of funny because one of the things I do at the game stores, we do have a D&D session now. So we do play Dungeons and Dragons. I've been playing since I was 13, and I am the quintessential bard. I am the jack of all trades, master of none. As you can kind of tell by talking about me, right? So, but yeah, so a while ago I was actually doing a little commercial job down in downtown Toms River. It was a little cafe that just needed drawings to get their permits to open up. And right down the street from that is a game store. They sell board games and that kind of stuff. And they had all these Star Wars sort of ships, all these little cool little models in the window. I'm like, so I went in there. I was like, what is this? And apparently there is an X-Wing, the miniatures game. You play on a 3x3 mat. You push little plastic spaceships around, and then you make pew pew noises as you shoot each other. And so at the time, of course, I decided my son, who was also a Star Wars fanatic, I'm like, well, my son would love this game. He was like 14 or 15 at the time. And so me and him went down there one day. We talked about it. Said, oh, there's a group on Wednesdays that meets here and plays. And so I got him the core set for Christmas. And after a while, he had gone. So I let him play for a while. I played with him a couple times on the kitchen table, and then he was, he was like ordering other ships online, and like cause ships they couldn't find. I'm like, what's going on? What's going on here? He was like ordering ships. Like I thought I was a Star Wars fanatic, but he like was ordering these ships. I didn't even know what they were. I'm like, all right, now wait, how is this a Star Wars ship now? And a lot of it turns out comes from the animated shows. They took a lot of inspiration from that, from a lot of the ship designs. And so now I play much more than he does. He's off at college now, and I play once a week. We go down on our Wednesday nights. We sometimes also on Thursdays. And we have a tournament once a month. And so now, like, there's been a group of us now that have started to travel to like other game stores and play in their tournaments.
So is that really true, or is that just what you tell your wife you're doing on Wednesday nights?
No, now she realizes, and this is one of the reasons I am absolutely blessed. She realizes I am a better person when I get my weekly dice therapy.
Well, of course.
I'm much
but what
easier.
are you really doing?
I am literally going down there and rolling dice and playing with plastic spaceships.
Fantastic.
Ed, you're in the same group? You play
Yes. Not only does he rope in and recruit his kids, but also his adult friends. It's great because, when you're younger, you're playing board games with your friends, you're playing wiffle ball, say, hey, who's around? Let's play, football with whatever kids in the neighborhood. It's exactly that feel.
Yep.
It's exactly that feel. Right. Of just hanging out with kids. It's a
A
lot of nostalgia. When I'm down there, I feel like, this is great. It's like, junior high, hanging out, just kind of having a good time.
It's the PG version of playing cards and drinking whiskey.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Right? I mean,
There's some guys there, there's some ladies there, there's some younger, kids, everyone's, welcoming, everyone's open, everyone's, welcoming to new players. Hey, try my ship. You don't have equipment, borrow some of mine.
The community is fantastic.
Yeah. And that really makes it nice because it's a very welcoming atmosphere, and I think it's kind of cool too, because, my son started playing and, at first when he went down, maybe a little bit shy, maybe a little bit, hesitant, meeting new people, but everyone is so welcoming that it kind of brings out, some of those folks that might be a little more introvert to kind of really relax and enjoy themselves.
That's funny you say that, Ed, too, because my son was, he's in engineering school now. He's in up in Rochester, but he not the most socially outgoing kid.
going to be a great engineer.
But anyway, he got into this game and he started going. Like I was like really, it was cool for him because he was never a sports kid. He did Cub Scouts and then Boy Scouts. He's got his Eagle Scout, which is fantastic. But that was like the one thing he ever did. And he found this game, and all of a sudden he was doing this. He was going down once a week. He was playing the tournaments once a month. I'm like, this is like fantastic. And I saw the change in him from 14 to when he graduated at 18 and then went off to college. He made strides where he could all of a sudden just go into and have like conversations with people, like
Strangers.
Yeah. And it was amazing to sort of like help him, because my son, he was born really early, and I wish looking back, I wish we had kept him out of school until his actual due date as opposed to when his actual birth date was, because I think he was always like the youngest kid, and I think he just, developmentally, he was like always like, he was smart enough and all that kind of, he's a big kid now, he's like 6, he's taller than me. But he was always like that, felt socially, he was like that one step behind. But he was such a ball of energy. We just, we had to like put him in school just to, for our own peace of mind. But that 4 years of playing X-Wing really, really helped him socially, being able to get ready and go off to college.
1 point for Star Wars.
Yeah. So Brian, I have a question for you, getting back to your business.
Yeah.
So you have your own business. We talked about some of your writing, you enjoy running, you have a gaming hobby. Now, I put myself in that category that Ray was joking around about, the chicken group. That was definitely me, who've always been afraid of having my own business or starting our own business or office, in my field in physical therapy, because I've always been scared about it's going to give up my whole life. I'm not going to have time for anything else. I'm not going to be able to live a life, but yet you're involved in so many things. What would you say to some of the viewers that are looking maybe to start their own business and yet try and balance their life? What have you found? What are some of the lessons that you can share?
Well, I mean, balance is, I don't know, I think it's like one of those holy grail concepts. I think it's one of those things that you can chase forever and not really get. So part of it is just having you got to set boundaries. You got to, and again, I sort of figured out a lot of the boundaries sort of 3 years into the fact, because I started without really a whole lot of planning. It's oh no, you're starting now. And then I had to sort of figure things out as I went. And so part of it was just sort of I sort of fell into things. I'm very much one of these things. I'm sort of a holistic. Anybody ever read, what was it? Dirk Gently and the Holistic Detective Agency?
I did not read that one.
Crickets. Over
No.
here. Yeah.
We need the cricket sound, Stevie.
It's a really good one. It's Douglas Adams. It's the same guy who wrote Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
It's his non-Hitchhiker.
This must be old then.
It's like Jurassic. It's way back.
And what's it called again?
Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency.
I will read it.
But basically, the whole thing is Dirk Gently goes through. He's a private detective, and he just goes through life just figuring he's going to be where he needs to be. He doesn't plan anything. He's like, it's going to happen. I'll figure stuff out as I go, and it'll just happen. That he always just sort of assumes he'll be at the right place at the right time, and something will fall into his lap.
Existentialist mentality.
A little bit, and I think I've sort of taken a little bit of that approach with my business because, again, I started it without planning. I had no choice. And then because my wife was working, so I was home. So, okay, so the kid need to go somewhere. Hey, I'm the one that's home. I'll deal with that. And so a lot of those kind of things, that sort of the flexibility was just sort of built into sort of the way I started from the get-go. The other weird thing with my business is that it's very much, it's not like it's not a 9 to 5 kind of thing. It's not some jobs are really easy. Some jobs, the first sketch you do is perfect. And some jobs, you're on, version 8 and they're still I'm not quite sure that's really what I want. And residential architecture is brutal. I always say that anybody going to architecture should minor in psychology because especially residential, half the problem, some people know exactly what they want and they don't have the language to tell you what that is.
Mind reader.
So it becomes this whole process of drawing out what's actually important. Yeah. And it just happens all the time. Somebody say, okay, this is what I want. And you draw that and they're like, that's not what I want. That's what you told me you wanted. And then so then you have to get sort of the questions behind the questions and figure out what they really want. And so I think just the way residential architecture in general is not something that's ever really rigid. It's very much, so there's times now where, it always happens where there's 3 projects on the boards that are the exact same phase and they all need to be done by Friday. And so then it's the same sort of it's like that last 10% process, right? You're just doing it over and over and over again. And there's times where everything's in the design phase where it's it's super easy where okay, this is what they said last time. You draw something up and you send it off and then you have to wait for them to get back to you.
Right.
And so you do that. And then I get up and I pet the cat and I have another cup of tea. And then, then I work on the next one. I just do the design thing. I send it out to the person. And then, so there's some days where it's just naturally, the balance is just sort of builds itself in.
Light.
So the cat loves the design phase.
Yeah, cat's all about the design phase. But then there's other times where you're getting up and you're just cranking till the end of the day. And then you get up the next day and you crank till the end of the day. And it's there's the production side of it and the design side. And it's one of the things I love about the job is because no 2 days are ever really the same. Because even if you're at the same phase, the projects are different. And so things are always different. And so there's some days where I'm out measuring and so you can draw existing buildings so that you can draw, design additions. There's other days where I'm, meeting builders in the field going, all right, this is a 100-year-old house. We just opened it up and all the structure runs opposite the direction that we thought it did. Now what do we do? All the beams are wrong. Okay, so now we're scrambling to figure out now everything's open and things are going on and things are ordered and we got to figure out all this new stuff right now. And that's one of the things that's always drawn me to this profession anyway, is just that it's just always different.
So how do you manage the time? Checklist, Google Calendar. How do you keep the business running? Know where you are on all these projects running in parallel? How do you do it?
It's really sort of crude. And basically I have a spreadsheet and then it's what phase things are at and, what needs to be done. And so then I have my spreadsheet, my basic thing. And then basically I literally keep a notepad open on my desktop, which has the things that are most important for that day. And so, so the spreadsheet does the big things this is done. I can mark this off and I've invoiced for this and this has come in and this is what's still due. And then like that little notepad file, I was like, okay, oh, that's right. This job, I got to get, he called me yesterday. He wanted this other thing. And so like that, so basically it's really kind of crude. But
Stevie, I'd like to request a sound bite every time the word spreadsheet is used on this show.
Yes.
Something that evokes the clouds parting and the rays of the sun coming down.
The spreadsheet
on
strikes
someone.
again. I was thinking the same thing.
Right?
It is.
but it's funny, that's a
that.
late addition. I really only started doing the spreadsheet like 4 years in.
Well, you've seen the light.
Yeah.
All right. So, your attitude, your energy is awesome, and it seems like you've been in the right place at the right time.
Except for when he lost his job a couple of times.
Well, it's because of Dirk Gently.
No,
But even that was perfect.
perfect. Exactly, that was perfect. So
Like literally, had I not lost my job that
right.
day, I wouldn't have answered those 3 phone calls.
That's right.
we've been too busy. So it almost seems too easy. I want to know where the struggles come. What have the missteps been?
Okay,
What
so-
hurdles did you have to clear?
Well, the first 3 years, well, first of all, I had no idea like how I was supposed to be, like what my fee structure was supposed to be. So I was like way undercharging the first couple of years. I didn't know what I was worth. So it took me a while to get to that point. And so like the first couple of years were a little rough in the sense where, my wife, who's the spreadsheet bills person, normally would come up and say, all right, first is coming up. These things are due. And I'd be like, all right, let's see who we can invoice this week. And then, all of a sudden that would say, oh, no, this is close to done. This now moves to the top of the list because I can finish that right away. And then I can invoice for that. And so the first couple of years, that sort of income instability was really stressful. I still wouldn't trade it for going back and sitting in an office under, soul bruising for fluorescent lights and having somebody else tell me what to do.
And how do you charge? Is it hourly, fixed fee, milestone,
So
GMP?
it's basically a combination of hourly. So basically, like when I get a project in, I've done it for enough years, so I have an idea of what that time, what that job should take me time wise. So I multiply it out, and it's basically I come up with a fixed fee, and then I usually break it up into usually 4 payments. So there's the one, kind of a retainer when I go out and start. And most of my work is additions. So when I come out and measure, you begin to pay me the first time. Then we design the plan stuff going on. When you accept the plans, when you say, okay, this is the plan I want, next payment. Then we design the elevations, the outside of the building, what it's going to look like. When that's the next payment. So actually, sometimes depending on the size of the job, the design plans and elevations will be part of the same phase. And then I get a set ready for them to start giving to builders, which is usually about 95% done. That then builders can start estimating from that, and that's usually the 3rd or 4th payment, depending on whether we combine the first one. And the 5th payment is when I deliver signed seal drawings.
So life is supposed to be difficult. Your biggest problem was realizing you could charge a shitload more than you were. There's got to be something else. I'm not buying it.
It's so funny too, because over the last couple of years, I still think I'm undercharging because like I keep like this basically for the last year, I've been like inching my fees up. I'm waiting for the time where somebody says, "Whoa, all right, that's way too much," and I haven't hit that point yet. So like every time
If you're not getting that feedback,
That's right.
you're not charging enough.
I know,
Not that
exactly.
You want to gouge people, but
Right.
that you want to be under that,
Yeah.
but close to it.
And so, I was so busy for the last couple of years with the pandemic and everything else. Like I'd throw like big numbers at certain things that I didn't want to touch. And then like they'd call me back like within an hour and say, okay, when do we start? I'm like, oh, man, I should have doubled that.
Well, so it sounds like it's going well.
It is.
When do you think you want to stop and retire?
Or would you ever?
Or do you love it enough that it's not an issue?
This
there's
guy
nothing wrong with
followed his
that.
bliss. I'm going to answer for him. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but
Well, no,
he loves what he does. He realized it's what he wanted to do in 4th grade. As long as he can see and run a computer and a tape measure,
And
a laser tape,
and a
whatever.
Spreadsheet.
Of course.
Eventually, I'd like to hire somebody else to run the spreadsheet because the numbers still make my brain hurt.
But I don't see you in a situation where you're thinking, oh, how many more jobs until I can retire or until I do retire?
No,
you love what you do.
The,
That's
the
awesome.
joke has always been that architects never retire. They always just get more and more selective about the projects they take on.
So how about that then? When will be the point where you're taking less projects on?
So I got 2 kids in college right now, so not for the next 4 years at least. But yeah, so it really kind of depends. Like right now, like I said, I do kind of love what I do. I would love to get to the point of my first boss where I could say no to the stuff that's like messy, right? Not Not quite there yet. Like really, I think I kind of feel a niche in my market of somebody who can call me like, like a big firm's not, if somebody's just like knocking out, they want to open up their kitchen to their dining room, they need somebody to size a beam. No big firm's going to take that job, right? I can say, sure, I can come out and they measure that. Well, I can size the beam. It takes me an hour. I get them a drawing. They pay me. And then I've tried to always be like small and flexible where I can take those like tiny little jobs. And
that like spreads the word, right? You get more customers,
Exactly.
more.
and somebody else said the next time their friend says, oh, I love what you've done. I want to do this too. Oh, call Brian.
And those simple changes, like knocking down a wall or getting a lallet column out of a basement, best money ever spent for some people,
Right.
Exactly.
myself included, 2 times.
It does. Those little changes can change somebody's house to like truly be what they want it to be.
Right.
Because I always tell people when I start a design project, like, look, don't even worry about we'll always make it look pretty. The first thing we need to do is make it work for the way you're going to live in it. So I ask a lot of questions at that first part, like, because it matters how the kitchen relates to the dining room, how the mud room relates to everything else. When you come in, some people, like I did a house, the first house I ever did actually, they wanted to come in the front door right into the kitchen. That's just the way they were going to live it. Would I ever design that house for myself? No. Is it gorgeous? Yes. And do they love it? Absolutely. So it's all about making
Right into the kitchen?
Yeah. Like literally you come in like right in, like there's the front door, there's a little tiny, not even a mudroom, it's kind of like a vestibule. It's only like 2, maybe 3 feet deep. But then you step right into there, right into the kitchen to the side of the island. And then the whole living space is off to the right.
So you see how he dodged that question?
Yeah.
But
Either you are just so freaking blessed that I'm tanning now from your spiritual glow, or there's something else there. Like you got run over by a train when you were an infant and these are prosthetic legs or something. I don't know.
well, I just don't think.
Are you that lucky and you deserve everything because obviously you're motivated and you take responsibility and
Science can't explain it. It's called being blessed.
hey, no, well I'm
Well, here's the
asking.
thing too, right? So like, obviously we could sit here and talk about, all kinds of stuff, but
It's just a theory.
so I have had, it's not like I haven't had any hard times. It's just that right now my job is not one of those things. Like, so right when I graduated from college, my younger brother died in a car accident.
Oh, geez.
Okay, so
I wasn't going that
no, but here's the thing, right?
deep. But,
You gotta be holistic. You gotta include everything, right?
all right.
Was that rough? Yes. My dad, I don't think mentally ever recovered from it. So like, and then my dad had a whole thing. I had to, watch my dad get cancer and go. So it's not like there hasn't been hardships, but there's certain things you can control and certain things you can't.
Just great to know you're normal.
And you gotta deal with what comes. You know what I mean?
And you know what, Brian? On that note, for our younger listeners, between your work, your hobbies, your writing, all your different interests, what life lessons would you share to the younger listeners that they should keep in mind when pursuing either things in work, their family life, or just their own pursuits?
I always, whenever I see the thing come up on Facebook or Twitter or everywhere, it says like, best life advice you could give in 4 words. My first thing is always, it's not about you. Life is too short to be focused on yourself and think about, what people think of me. But people don't care what, some people, they won't go to the gym because they don't want to be like my dad actually said at one point, he was recovering from heart surgery and he needed to go to the gym. So I'm not going to be the old fat guy. I'm like, Dad, you are an old fat guy, but no one else cares. Just go in and get on the treadmill. You know what I mean?
Right.
People don't care, they just don't care. So life is too short to not do the things that you want to do, and there's nothing wrong with failure. You try stuff and you're not good at it, fine, but at least you tried. And that was something, my son was one of those guys where he wanted to be good at things so badly that he didn't try a lot of stuff. And I'm like, dude,
We have one of those too. Yeah.
it's like, dude, just, you never know. You know what I mean? You might hate it. You might fail at it. You might find your calling. You just don't know unless you go out there and do it.
Or you might have to practice to get good at it, right? But
Right. And so like my mom always said that I always wanted to know enough about every subject where I could comfortably have a conversation about anything. And so that becomes my Bard personality, right? So I'm the jack of all trades. I want to know a little about everything. And I've always been that kind of, I just want to know how things work. I want to know how things are, like, I didn't realize it after the fact. I want to know how things are put together. And so I think that leads to a lot of the way I approach my business, right? Or my art, if you would call it. And I always say, like, so I'm a writer and so I always say I want to construct poems and I want to see if I can write architecture. So I always and again, it's just like a mental exercise where you start thinking about like, what does that mean? And so you start, again, it's like having those things in place where it's sort of like, now you're choosing words. Now you really think about how things, and so that's always been I just always wanted to learn stuff. I always wanted to know how things work, how things are put together. And so I really just tried to, go out there and learn stuff and find out how things are put together.
Very cool.
This guy's awesome. Ed,
Yeah.
is Brian, you're so look, you got people on, everything runs on a continuum, big spectrum, right? You got people who do nothing but complain to the point where, unless they have something to complain about, they're not content or happy, right? This guy's on the other end of the spectrum. I had to ask and drill about 4 times to get to anything negative. And the reality is, no different than anybody else, right? We've all been through hardships, or at least by the time you're our age, you've been through hardships. But your focus on the positive and what you can do and just going forward relentlessly is awesome.
And he's humble about his willingness to learn. He also left out that he's a black belt in martial arts, and he's a bassist in a band.
Well, I'm glad I complimented you, because now you're not going to kick my ass. Jeez.
All right, so I do play bass badly, but I'm not in a band currently. So
Awesome. So, look, I think that was a pretty great interview, Brian. We
To
appreciate
list
you coming.
everything out that this guy can do, you would need
Yeah.
a spreadsheet. Thank you.
That's like the magic wand of our podcast.
Yeah.
The spreadsheet.
Awesome. Well, Brian, appreciate it. It's been great.
thank you very much. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank you for your time and being honest and open.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening to the Attic Static Podcast. If you like what you heard, please like and subscribe, and feel free to leave a comment below. Or come check us out at our website at atticstaticpod.com. And stay tuned for new episodes out every Monday.